Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I just came back from a camping trip this week. So
Nice.
I'm showered and feeling good.
You showered for this?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's
You wouldn't be able
above
to
and
tell, but I
beyond.
did. Yeah.
So what I'm
Um,
doing right now, why I might seem distracted, is that I am actually looking at this new Reclaim.tv and and subscribing on Mastodon.
yeah, we got all kinds of new stuff. I feel like we had um, you know, the Reclaim EdTech year in some ways culminated with the conference, which was of course not just the whole company, but and then we kind of took a couple weeks in August, like 2 weeks, and now we're now it's really feels like year two. And so one of the
Okay.
things that that you and I were talking about is we need to get back to more just sort of off the cuff, a regular streaming. So we're going to try to make a thing of this a little bit more is just, hey, we're going to go talk about X. And this is going to be maybe the first one of the, or not maybe, it is the first one of these. Um, you might be watching on YouTube. You might also be watching on Reclaim TV, which is our new Owncast install that
Yes.
is going to be something we'll be trying to stream in both places most of the time. Um, and Owncast is a really cool tool. We'll talk about Owncast at some point on its own, possibly.
Did it come up in our open source media ecosystem?
Yes, it did. Yep.
Oh, they're so
And
good.
I think you and I both played with Owncast quite a bit over the years, but it had been about a year since I had really dug back into it because we had been going all in on PeerTube, and PeerTube is great too. We're not abandoning PeerTube, but
Nope.
um, we're trying to. We won't talk too much about it because we have limited time, but we're trying to kind of rethink
It's
and
true.
kind of situate like, well, we want people to know that all the streaming and video stuff we do is both on YouTube and on the Fediverse, basically. And what does that mean? And how can we make that easy for people to navigate and know where to go? And so what we're kind of landing on at the moment is, okay, well, we'll keep doing stuff on YouTube, of course. And then we're going to use Ohmcast as kind of like the front end. So if we are live doing anything, you just go to reclaim.tv and you should be able to see us there.
Yeah.
That's at least in theory. So, but
It's actually happening. I can see us there.
yeah, yes, I should say I know we are live today because I have the thing up or whatever. But yeah, so one of the cool things that StreamYard lets us do is send our streams to multiple places. So we're using that, and then I think the next step is every once in a while I like to do when I do streams myself. I like to use OBS so I can really just like crank the quality to max and do like 4K and stuff. And I want to see what that means for simulcasting. I don't even know if it's going to be possible, to be honest, bandwidth wise and everything, but I'm going to mess with it. So, yeah, I do realize I have to put our title in because it just says test right now. But that's one thing I have to mess with. But yeah, this is the first one of these simulcast Reclaim EdTech streams. So
We're mass communicating.
um,
This
cool.
isn't one at a time in here.
Yeah, that was for year one. This is year two. We have to do two streams now.
Man. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Year two streams.
Mm-hmm.
Year three, who knows?
So, for
What are we
today,
here to talk about, though, Taylor? What is the
yeah,
news?
we want to talk about UMW blogs, and this is going to be about the
Yes.
technical sort of background technical details about the archiving of it and how it was done, and sort of what we did to make it work. I don't think it's going to be the last time we're going to talk about UMW blogs archiving project in general. I think it would be awesome to talk with some of the folks from UMW right now and have you talk about maybe like, what it, you wrote a great blog post, a eulogy of sorts to UMW blogs, and hey, you know, nobody's gonna be creating new content on it anymore, kind of thing. But I would love to talk more about that in general, but we thought it would be good to separate out into its own little informal stream of just like the nitty gritties of like, how do you take a
How'd you do
WordPress
it?
multi-site with, you know, 10,000 sites and archive it to flattened HTML in a way that is possible, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Let's hear it. How did you do it? I'll start with the question. Taylor, how did you archive UMW blogs?
So yeah, so basically we used a toolkit called the Site Archiving Toolkit, which I've talked about before. And this is a toolkit that I put together that really is just a nice, easier to use wrapper. It's a script around two tools, Web Recorder and HTTrack. Web Recorder and HTTrack are really interesting tools. We've done a little bit about them before. I'm sure we'll talk about them again. I'd love to do at some point maybe a whole course on archiving if there is interest in the far future. But basically, they do two things different. They do the same thing different ways. You give it a URL, these two tools, and HTTrack will give you a flattened HTML structure. So it'll give you a folder of HTML files basically, and it'll be representative of what the website looks like right now. So you can take a dynamic site like a WordPress site or really anything and get a copy of it as it looks like in that moment in HTML. Web Recorder or Browsertrix Crawler, which is sort of like the souped up version of this that you can run on a server. Web Recorder does the same thing, but instead of delivering just a folder of HTML files, it gives you a sort of zipped up web archive file. And it's very sophisticated. Web Recorder has all kinds of capabilities to capture like funky things that the modern web can do, like sometimes fancier. This isn't so much a consideration with WordPress sites, but sometimes other types of tools will do things like use JavaScript to load in other style elements dynamically after the page loads, actually. And Web Recorder has capabilities to do that. So HTTrack is great because it's sort of simple and it gets the job done. And what you're left with is HTML files, which is the same kind of HTML files we've had as long as the web has existed in a lot of ways. And Web Recorder packages it into its own thing, which is still based on a standard. But you need a special way to be able to view those files, basically. And what my toolkit does is make it really easy, well, relatively easy. You give it a command of archive and a URL you want to archive, and then it will use both of those tools to make those archives and then set them up so that you can view them and move them to a web server for long-term preservation.
Is it true, Taylor, that you have basically an installer in Reclaim Cloud to do this? Like, I'm not being facetious. You have created one, right?
Yep. Yeah. This is a thing you can run in Reclaim Cloud right now. So if you go to the marketplace, and I'll kind of talk about like what this meant for the UMW blogs archiving process. But if you go to the marketplace and search for archiving, site archiving, or go to the education category, I have it bookmarked here. You can just click a button and get your own copy of this. And I'll demo what this looks like in a second. But basically, I've already got one deployed that I use from time to time. But once you've got one deployed, you open up a terminal in it, and you just type archive and then the URL you want to archive. So I'm going to give it a few of them. We'll do a small site that I have that I know is going to finish relatively quickly. And we'll do like the reclaim.cloud website. And so you can give it one URL or you can give it several, and it will just one at a time go through the list, basically. And if you give it several, you need to separate it with a space.
Can I give you a URL to try?
Yeah. I actually already started this one, so let me quit it.
this is the first, because this is talking about UMW blogs. There was a proto UMW blogs called like blogs.elsweb.org that's still online.
Well, okay, so we can do that, and we're gonna see. This will be a good demo, depending on how long it takes, of why this isn't super straightforward for a WordPress multi-site, right? Why couldn't I just say, hey, just go archive umwblogs.org, done, you know? And why isn't it that simple? Because this made simple a lot of elements, but there was still quite a bit of extra stuff. So yeah, we can definitely do that and see how it does, basically.
Yeah.
Let me just delete the things. Okay, so what was the? I am still going to have it do that tiny site just so we can see a completed one, because this one probably won't finish while we're talking. So
gotcha.
What's the other URL?
Is HTTP. I don't know if it's HTTPS. I don't know if that will create a problem. Let's see.
Here, let's visit it and we'll see.
Yeah, it does. It loads securely. Blogs.elsweb.org. I can't believe it's still online.
WordPress is resilient.
Oh yeah, it's crazy.
So mine loads not over, but if
you force it, it will do it.
Ooh, it's got parts of it are insecure. Yeah, we'll see how this goes. I'm actually gonna because it looks like some images are insecure. I'm going to have it do the non-secure version. Perfect. But this is a good first step. Is if you're going to use my toolkit to archive something, these tools are not smart. So that my toolkit certainly isn't smart. It's basically just a script that's giving like my favorite command line options for using these, and you don't have to worry about it.
That's nice.
But if you do something like let's say I wanted to archive my blog site and you gave it http://jaden.me. If you did that, it would, oh, I guess I'm not redirecting to HTTPS on my website. I need to do that. But a lot of websites force you into HTTPS. And if you give not the right version, right? If you give it HTTP and it redirects, what you'll end up with is one blank page, because the web recorder and HTTrack will be like, cool, we recorded that redirect. Oh, did you want us to actually record the page behind the redirect? No, we won't do that.
Yeah, too much.
So, yeah, so you do want to be careful, and it's just one of those things you got to play with it, right? Like, because every site has a little bit different things with it. So I'm gonna make a guess, just because some of those images aren't loading securely. Let's not do the HTTPS version, just to see how that goes. So anyway, I'm gonna give it 2 URLs, and it's going to go ahead. The cool thing about this is it's actually doing them simultaneously, both the Browsertrix crawler and HTTrack thing. Right now we're looking at the HTTrack's command line output, so you can watch it, but you can actually close this and it will just keep doing its thing in the background.
Oh, really? So you can close it and it's basically already in the background.
Yeah. For the Docker inclined, it's running as a Docker. It's running as a daemon. So with the -D command line switch, so that it just will keep doing its thing. In fact, if you want to quit it, you have to type a special command that will go and it will quit the container.
It's the command quit it?
Yeah, I should make that. It's quit -crawlers. So I do have this roughly outlined on the GitHub page, and I'm working on documentation for it, like good documentation, but this has the basics. So basically archive space the URL, and you can give it more than one if you want, and then quit -crawlers. That's the command.
Look at you. That's awesome.
So
you're full blown.
You can also run this on your own computer if you install Docker on your own machine if you want to. There are a lot of downsides to that, because while this will run in the background even on your own machine, if your machine goes to sleep, it's gonna stop, right? So I wanted this to be an option for folks, and I wanted to say like, hey, if you don't want to run this on the cloud, you don't have to, but this type of work really is a lot easier on the cloud, especially because you can let it loose with as much resources as you want to give it, as you want to pay for. And then as soon as the crawl is done, it costs you basically nothing. In fact, you can delete the environment if you download your crawls
And there's a story there that you'll get to when you talk about UMW blogs, like what you expected the time it would take and what the time you did it in, right?
Yeah. So getting to the UMW blog specific, that's how that tool works. We're gonna if I refresh the page here, this is sorry, let me do this again. So this is the URL for my archiving environment. If I click on it, it's just running a basic Apache server. Like if you've ever used Apache and not put an index file in a folder, you'll see something like this. That's literally what my toolkit's doing because I am not a web developer. And so this recipes one is done. So what you see here is, hey, this one's incomplete. That's the ELS web one. The recipes one is done. This site is like nothing. So it probably took a very short amount of time. There's 6 things in this folder, 3 of them for web recorder, 3 of them for HTTrack. So I can download the completed crawls with these zip files here, and I can just click on them and they'll download. I can look at the log. If it's stuck, this is great because you can actually look at the log even while it's running in the incomplete folder, and we'll look at that. Or if you're just curious, you can look at this and go, all right, it started at 13 minutes past the hour and it finished at almost 15 minutes past the hour. So it took 2 minutes for HTTrack. And you'll notice if we go to web recorder here, its log. Now this log is really messy to look at, but this one started 13:55 and finished at 15:04. So in this case, it took about the same amount of time for both of these to finish. I can also click on the ones here that have no other thing here. This I can just look at it and browse the actual the work it did. And you'll notice here that the full URL is kind of messy because it's in this archiver environment, but it does work. So we can look at this this kind of broken site that I have that I never did anything with. Someday I will.
One day, yes.
And if I do the same thing with web recorder, this is kind of the cool trick. So web recorder it's easy to make web recorder archives, but they have documentation on, well, what if I wanted to host an archive somewhere? But I wanted to make this like dead simple so that people could run my tool, download the zip file, and literally go to shared hosting and unzip it, and just you're done, basically. That's the goal. And so this is what you wind up with. It takes a second to load because that's just how web recorder works. But you get this fully browsable web recorder archive. It'll have the URL, the original URL here, which I think is kind of a nice touch.
It is cool, yeah.
You hilariously get a refresh button. Why that's there, I don't know, because it's never going to be any different, but whatever. There's back and forward buttons in there, and then this will actually search through the entire text. So if I look for the word soup, it shows up on these 2 pages.
Nice.
Which is cool. And so that's the difference. Now the actual content of that archive, if I go in here, is kind of simple. So if I go to the crawls folder, that's where they all get saved in Reclaim Cloud. Let me zoom this in a little bit. So this one here, here's the 2 folders. These zip files are literally the same as these. It's just zipped up so you can really quickly download them. And if I go in the web recorder folder, here's everything. So there's an index file. This is the actual stuff. This is the archive. If you didn't want to host this, you could just grab this file and throw it in Google Drive or something for later safekeeping. Or if you want the whole thing so that you could host it someplace else without even having to remember how it works, you just keep the zip file, because the zip file is going to be, I accidentally went back in Reclaim Cloud. The zip file is going to be basically the same, just with that extra HTML file. So this is the WACZ, Web Archive Zipped. So this itself is compressed. And then the replay folder just has the JavaScript that makes the player we were looking at, the website, work. And then the index file is real basic. It's just saying, hey, here's the name of that archive, and here is the URL that you should open the archive to and embed. So, and I have some, hey, if you don't want it to look this way, they have some documentation on how you can change from
Interesting.
default to replay. So if I change this to replay only, it doesn't actually show that address bar, I believe.
Is replayweb.page, is that the what's the name of the tool again?
Yes, replayweb.page is their little way that you can you can read a web archive file. So
Gotcha.
my little thing here is designed to make this unnecessary, basically, for certain use cases, right? My goal is like imagine if the way we archive UMW blogs was to say, all right, well, here's 9,000 files. If you want to look at them, you have to download one at a time and go to replayweb.page and click choose file and look. That would suck, right? Like nobody would want that. So my little thing is to basically do what replayweb.page does, but in a way that feels more like the web, basically. And again, I'm not trying to blow this out of proportion. All my script does is just simply write this index file for you and grab this replay folder for you. This is documented on the replayweb.page site. They have a thing that's like, hey, you know, if you want to do this yourself, download this folder, write an index file. But I wanted to make that like something you didn't have to think about.
Is that something the web recorder folks built?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So problems with doing this for a 9,000 site WordPress multi-site like UMW blogs. And I should say it's 9,000. We archived around 9,000 sites. That was after the Shannon and possibly other folks at UMW did a lot of cleanup work. So they went through and helped people move to their new WordPress multi-site for probably, I would imagine that work was happening for basically the entire year before, and also archiving some stuff that was just broken and stuff like that. So sorry, archiving in the WordPress multi-site sense, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You take it offline.
I think there was as many as 13 or 14,000 sites.
Yes.
At some point.
Yeah. So this was, we narrowed it down to 9,000. And what we found was the way my toolkit works, where it takes both versions, the HTTrack and web recorder version. Well, we don't really need that. We really only need one good version, right? The reason my toolkit works this way is so that you can look at both versions and decide which one you want to keep, basically, because those tools work differently. And sometimes one will do a better job or just fit your use case better, right? One of the things that's cool about the HTTrack thing is that all of the links are, if you put these files in the right place, are the same links. But that's not how web recorder works out of the box, because it's this funky JavaScript application, basically. So what I originally was thinking was, okay, let's use HTTrack because then all the links will resolve. Well, what I found in my testing is if I just use HTTrack is much slower for larger sites. And I'm not really sure why that is. It just is that way. Web recorder is really fast. By my guess, if I gave HTTrack 9,000 sites to crawl, it would have taken up to 9 months for it to finish. I did a test of like 300 sites, and it took multiple days to finish. So I was like, okay, well, that is not going to work. So, but the web recorder one went much faster. And then, but to speed it up even further, I decided what I was going to do was split this. I was going to make 9, and I ended up actually doing 10 different environments in Reclaim Cloud that were all just doing web recorder archiving for this project. So we took our list of 9,000 URLs to archive, and we split it up into basically 9 pieces with a 10. I'll talk about the 10th one a little bit. And so they were all simultaneously working. And I should say Jim had to pop out for a second, but he'll be back. So this was kind of a big wrangling of files and stuff to make that all work. Hey, so what I was just saying is that we took this 9,000 URLs and I made 9 environments and split it into roughly 1,000 URLs per environment. And so that we could do 9 environments simultaneously, all crawling UMW blogs at the same time. And I will say I was a little bit worried that UMW Blogs itself was going to crack under the pressure of that kind of traffic, but it did fine. It really was.
But who hosts it?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Well, and that's the thing. If it was hosted someplace else, let's say that it didn't crack under the traffic pressure, it probably would have gotten blocked for what looked like malicious traffic.
Yeah, blacklisted for sure.
So
can I ask you something with that 10 instances that you were running?
Mm-hmm.
How did it know which ones to do? Did you say do these X amount of sites? You do these X amount of sites? Did each of them have a predetermined site?
That is an excellent question and a great way to transition.
Thank you.
So what I did is I made a special version of my site archiving toolkit just for this project. And I wouldn't have had to do it this way, but it was just easier for me to basically take my site archiving toolkit and I made a branch called UMW Blogs. And this is where all of my work happened for this project, basically. So what I did, and let me again zoom this in a little bit, it's really the same basic thing, but I went in and I disabled some functionality. So I said I disabled the stuff that would make HT track archives. So that we just weren't doing that. We were skipping that part. And then I made a script for each archiving server. So basically, first I used the WP CLI to get a list of what are all my URLs. And then I made that into a text file. So this is a text file of all the URLs. And then I just manually in a text editor, I used VS Code to select 1,000 of those at a time. And I put them into a script like this. So it was archive.sh. That's the archiving script that I made. And one line here per URL. Right. So the nice thing about doing it this way is I could look at in the logs and see, well, where is it right now? Right now it's working on summerinspain.umwblogs.org. So I know it's at site 49 of 1,000. And so this is really nice during the monitoring aspect of it. And then I made one of those for each of them. And then that's how this started. And I ended up having to get even a little bit more funky with it. You'll notice these resume files. These are scripts I made where basically I found that the web recorder version we were using has some bugs. I mean, every software has bugs, but there was a particular bug where once in a while it would get stuck on a site. And so I would look in there and notice that it hasn't made any progress in like 3 hours. And so that I would go in and I would quit it. I would take the site that it was currently working on and I would move it to this stuck.sh file. And so there was really only 23 sites I had to do this with, including the front page, by the way. But
did they have something in common that made them do this?
I'm really not sure. I think that this is something to do with the size of the sites. I think once they get to a certain point, that this version of Web Recorder was just choking on it, and it was just not having a good time. Because most of these, actually, that's not true. Some of these were smaller, but some, like the tag site, this site is massive. It's a copy of every post on the network from 2008 to 2015, so it's just huge. But yeah, honestly, Jim, I didn't take the time because it's not like I could do anything about it anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So because it's not my software, right? Ultimately, Web Recorder would have, the folks in that project would be best served to fix that. So what I did is I set them aside for the moment. I said, great, I'll return to these. And one at a time, I would add to the list. And then the resume file is how I would resume. So I would go through and say, all right, well, like for instance, UMW7 got stuck. Ethics and Lit was the one right before it. So Ethics and Lit was 827. So it probably got stuck on this one, the one right before it. And so I would make a copy of the file, delete everything before it, and restart the crawl. But let's start with the next one, basically. It was kind of a manual process, right? But
so honestly, here's how crazy it is. That Mopo site that I got stuck on is Mara Scanlan's Modern Poetry site.
Wow.
So that's crazy that I know which
and that
site
one looks
it
like
is
it was
in
busted. So
yeah.
So anyway, so that's that's how that worked basically. It was a little bit of a manual process restarting these, but not that bad. I mean, honestly, 23 problematic sites out of 9,000, like,
It's good.
I'll take it.
Good numbers. Exactly.
Yeah. So I gave 9. So I created 9 of these environments and I went in and ran the commands in each one, right? But the nice thing is I made this GitHub branch so that I would have sort of the same set of files on each. So that it was really just me going in and typing bash umw2.sh basically. And it would run the thing. And so then I also made a different version of my installer specifically for this. Now this wasn't published. I just took this JPS and used the import button in Reclaim Cloud to run it. But what this one does is it's really the same thing as my normal installer, except it's specifically getting the branch version, right? The UMW blogs version, so that when I would deploy these 9 archivers, it automatically had these set of files right away. And the cool thing is I could use Git to manage all of this, right? So if I made changes, I could just do a Git pull and it would all have the same version of everything. Now there are more sophisticated ways to do this. Like I even thought about, because I had 9 of these, like if you had like say 40 environments, you could use something like Ansible to actually run the same command in each place. But I wasn't going to set up and configure Ansible for just 9 environments. That would be a nightmare. And I'm not really an expert at Ansible anyway. So while we at the company, like infrastructure, has expertise, that's not really something I know that much about. So
exactly.
But my point is to say there are ways to avoid having to type the same command in 9 times, besides copy and paste, which is of course what I did. So my installer here grabbed this special version and deployed it. And then I ran that installer 9 times. So I had 9 environments to work with. And then I did end up making a 10th one where I ran the stuck script. And this one I had to modify further so that it would use the latest version of Web Recorder, which actually seemed to fix some of the bugs I was running into. So that was a little bit of a process to figure that out. So then what you've got is 10 places where all of these files are. So the next step for me, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but the next step for me was to back up all of these to Google Drive. I wanted to have a copy in case I messed anything up. So I used rclone to do that. So they basically uploaded right from the environment to Google Drive. We've used rclone around here for a few different things, and it's basically like a command line interface to cloud services. It's really, really cool tool.
Yeah.
Then I rsynced all from all of these different places to one container that was going to host all of the archives, basically. And so I set up the private key, a public key pair thing, and did the archiving. And some of this I was able to kind of automate and make a little bit faster. So I have a whole set of notes here that were sort of my like, all right, let's formulate this terrible long command that will do 5 things in a row so that I can paste it in 9 times, basically.
So when you mean archiving the files, right? So when this was done, right? Say umw4.sh.
Yeah.
It created a web recorder archive that you then uploaded into one space. Like, how did that work?
Good question. So it was making one web recorder archive per site, per sub site, just like we're seeing here on my little test one that I was messing with. So I would look at UMW. It was like the URLs were like UMW blogs archiver 4.us.reclaim.cloud. And I actually ran these across every region in our infrastructure just to balance the load. Again, I was worried that it was going to cause problems in terms of storage and things. And to be perfectly honest with you, it would have in terms of storage, but not really CPU or RAM or anything. So then I basically would look at them. I'd click on like 50 of them and be like, did these all work? And then I rsynced all of them over. One other change that my special version of the UMW blogs archiver did is it actually did not zip up any of them because I wasn't going to be downloading them, right? I didn't need that extra zip file. So it was designed to just make the files that we needed as to save space, basically.
Sure.
Then so they all got synced to this environment, which I can pull up, which is let me I have to zoom out and zoom back in here, just because I'm making this text bigger. But this is an environment I made called UMW Blogs Archive. It's actually in our EU region, which just cause honestly it was the new region at the time. It still is, I guess. And they all end up in the webroot directory. So this environment is just an Nginx environment. It has PHP and Nginx, and that's it. It's very bare bones. And so all of those wound up in here. If I do an ls here, it actually takes a while to do it. Wow. And all 9,000 are in here. So there's 9,000 folders basically. And it's not exactly 9,000. I think it's like 9,100 or something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head. And so in each of these is that archiver, archive.wacz file that we were looking at. So if I go in here and look at ZMALIK, how about that one? Same thing as, so there's that index file, the archive file, and the replay folder. So the cool thing with this, and this was kind of part of the project, is that the folks at UMW wanted, is they wanted the ability to kind of easily delete or hide archives if people chose to. So they've said like, hey, if we have someone that comes to us and says, I don't want this hosted anymore, we have to have a way to take it down, which was a great thought, honestly. Like it was absolutely good foresight there, because if they hadn't said that, I might have done this a little bit differently so that it was all in one archive. But
I'm actually going to reach out to them about a site. If I can share this for a second.
Yeah,
I might get this one. I might get this one removed.
Take that one down. Is it slanderous? All kinds of garbage on that site.
It's just the header image is from Tom Woodward, and it's just wonderful because he took that image, and what the image says is, sometimes I stay awake watching you sleep. And that's the baby with me photoshopped. Anyway, I don't know what the hell he was thinking, but it's amazing. Anyway, yeah, that's a fun, and it looks amazing. It looks great. This archive.
Yeah, so this is the end result, and we'll talk a little bit about, because to be honest with you, the archiving, I know it sounded complicated, and in some ways it was, but I had a process. I kind of knew what I was going to run into, and it worked really well. Really, the part I was had the most figuring out to do going into this, just because I've been working on this site archiving toolkit kind of for like a year and a half now in some ways. So I'm getting more and more familiar with the web recorder and HTTrack stuff. But the hosting part, how do we host 9,000 of these, was really a challenge for two reasons. So A, just a lot of them, and B, UMW Blogs is a subdomain site, and I was not about to go and make 9,000 subdomains in like cPanel manually or something. And this isn't even running cPanel, by the way, because ultimately they don't want to pay a lot. Like, we don't want to have UMW Blogs cost a lot of money for UMW to host, right? Because cPanel has a license associated with it. That makes no sense. So what we did is basically fancy redirects to make all of the links still work. And that was some figuring for me, because I'm just like doing redirects in htaccess, or in this case, in Nginx configs, is tricky. I messed around with it, and I couldn't get it to work the way I wanted, because I wanted two kinds of redirects. First of all, the subdomain should redirect to the right folder. So you can see this right now in your example site. So if I type in, well, if I just go to umwblogs.org, that's an example too. But if I go to jimgroom.umwblogs.org, it's going to, the web server is going to take that request and say, he Taylor wanted to visit jimgroom.umwblogs.org, but I'm going to take him to umwblogs.org/jimgroom instead, because that's where the archive lives. The second part is individual pages should also redirect, right? We don't want to break links here as much as possible. And that's a challenge because there is only one real web page in there, and that's that index file that loads the archiver, loads the web recorder playback, the replay web page thing. Cool thing about web recorder though is they have a capability, this address bar, right? Like, so if I go to this blog, if I click on this link here, it shows me the right where it used to live. And it actually does, if you configure this correctly, it does actually change the URL up here so that it's a real link on the web. So my thing also takes any other part of the URL and parses that out and passes it to web recorder so that you land in the right place. So if I take this whole URL right here, jimgroom.umwblogs.org/blog, and put this in an address bar, it's going to parse it out correctly so that you land in the right place.
Wow. Yeah.
And because I don't 100% know, this wasn't something we with working with UMW, worked out all of the what should redirect and what shouldn't. But I was like, let's be good citizens of the web here. We should try to preserve as much of the links as possible, certain things won't always work though, right? Like if someone was linking to this header image here, well, that's sort of in the archive and that link probably has changed. But to be honest, that type of linking for embedded images from other sites is never a good practice. So, those things change anyway.
Exactly.
So the cool thing is if you do something like on a search engine, like look for a site, umwblogs.org, and just look at search results, these should work, even though they are at the old URL still.
Wheel. Yeah.
There we go.
Wow. Look at that. That's crazy.
So the way that redirect worked, I'm pretty proud of this because it took me a long time to figure out. And I think as someone who's more familiar with PHP and this kind of stuff, maybe this is old hat, but I had trouble parsing the URL to do all of those two things at the same time, the subdomain and the rest of the URL. Sure. That wasn't working for me in Nginx or htaccess properly. So I actually wrote a tiny little PHP script to handle this. And the way it works is in the environment, and if I go back up here, there is an index.php file that gets loaded if you don't specify anything else. And in here, it just says, hey, if the host name, so that's umwblogs.org, equals the URL that people requested, go to this specific one, right? And that's to make the homepage work, basically. Yeah. But for anything else, this is kind of the actual magic. Take the URL and parse it out like this. Grab the subdomain they asked for and put that in, and then grab the rest of the URL they asked for and put that in. And this handles basically all of the traffic. So the funny thing is technically, while we flattened UMW blogs, it's not actually a flattened thing. It's using a little bit of PHP.
It is, but still,
but this is
no database calls though.
No database, and this is 10 lines of PHP. This is not much.
Can I ask you something on this?
Mm-hmm.
What is so a lot of this is happening in web recorder. What is htrack's role?
So in this case, we didn't use htrack at all because we only needed to wind up with one version, right? And htrack was so slow that it was going to take forever. So we decided no. Plus the storage here. So UMW blogs beforehand used I want to say it was 200 to 300 gigs of storage. So it's a pretty large, pretty large site. The problem is that was a dynamic site, right? So if you think about it in terms of the way what's actually stored there, well, the database contains all the text for all the posts and anything that's common, right? So if you have 15 sites on UMW blog, 15 themes on UMW blogs. And let's say one of those themes is used on 7,000 sites. It only needs one copy of the theme, right? But that's not the case with this. These are all individual sites. So that you use more storage. This is using about 500 gigabytes of storage. So almost double, basically, which is honestly not as bad as I thought it. I was a little worried it could be worse, but there wasn't really a great way to estimate this ahead of time. So what I did is I archived like a few hundred and then extrapolated from there and said like, well, it uses about this much for this, times 18. This will be about the storage. But obviously I couldn't know that for sure because there are some larger sites and some smaller sites, but it actually ended up being the cool thing is the scale of this, that law of averages type math actually worked. So
it did.
But I wasn't sure. Right. And the cool thing though, is while it uses more storage and of course the storage will cost more, right? Because it's twice as much. The cloudlet usage here is nothing. This thing sits at one cloudlet basically all the time. And let me, so
that's crazy.
It's literally using one cloudlet. We only even let it get up to 16. I've never seen it use more than 2 because it's not doing anything. It's just providing one file. It's running a 10-line PHP script, and then, so for perspective, UMW blogs used like 120 basically, just at any given time.
Gigantic amount.
So they're going to save a lot of money based on that.
Can you get analytics about who visits on this?
We could. I don't right now, right? But we theoretically could do some things with. Honestly, what I would probably do right away is just use the web server logs to get some basic stuff. But we'd have to feed that in a tool. To be perfectly honest, I'm not that familiar with Nginx really. So I know that where those logs are, but we would have to parse them in some way that would be useful. And the cool thing about cPanel is those tools are built in for Apache logs, right? The AW stats and stuff. But there would be ways to do this here. We could do something like use Matomo and put a Matomo tag on that index file. So what we would do is go in and right at the bottom of this index .html file, throw a Matomo tag on every single one. And I wouldn't have to do that 9,000 times. We could script that to just throw that at the bottom of each. And that would give us some analytics. And that's probably the way I would do it. And honestly, I would host Matomo just in cPanel probably, so that we don't really have to think about it. But you could also host Matomo in maybe its own cloud environment. I wouldn't want to put it in this one just because Matomo does require a database and stuff like that. So like, why complicate this environment? Keep it separate. But you could. Right now, we're not really tracking anything.
I'd be interested. I would be interested to see like.
Or you could use Google Analytics too, but like, why do that?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's kind of how that works. Oh, one other thing is the way that this file gets called, that index file, right? Because if you visit, the way web servers work, if you visit umwblogs.org, it's going to actually visit umwblogs.org/index.php, right? But if I ask for anything else, that's not what it's going to try and visit. So the way I had it call that script is in Nginx's configuration, and I'm looking through my notes right now to find out even where this is because I just don't remember off the top of my head. It's Etsy Nginx conf.d sites enabled default.conf. In here, I set the error page, the 404 error page, to that index file. So if you request a file it does not know about, it's going to run that redirect script. Basically.
Interesting.
So that's cool and was great because then that kind of handles everything in the way that you would expect it to work. Because what I ran into with my previous attempts at this was like I could make redirects work the way I wanted, but then it would break any site that actually existed. So this is great. This only runs if you don't ask for a site that exists. Wait, that's important, right? Because you should be able to type in jimgroom.umwblogs.org, and this is going to be great when this gets removed, but whatever. Or you should be able to go to umwblogs.org/jimgroom, because that's where the actual archive is now located.
Totally.
Both of those should work.
It's so good. It really, it's an awesome project. ELS blogs, I'm glad you took me through this, because now I see some of the issues it's going to run into with redirects and subdomains. I think I ran that as a subdomain, but I'll have to check. But this is what I wanted to wrap my head around. The good thing is I want to archive the 100,000 posts in DS106.
And that'll be relatively easy, honestly.
Because they're all in one database.
Yeah. So if it's at one base URL, then you should be able to just... Because keep in mind, the way the archiving stuff works for Web Recorder and HTTrack is it's literally firing up a web browser. In the case of Web Recorder, it's actually literally Chrome, which is really interesting. Like, it uses a Dockerized version of Chrome. And it just clicks on every link it can find. Like, that's all it does. I shouldn't say all it does. That sounds reductive. It does a lot, but it doesn't know magically that these other subdomains exist, right? So if I was to point this at umwblogs.org, well, the only thing it would capture is every page on here, but there's like tons of sites that aren't linked to from here. We got some broken images, unfortunately. That, I'm going to tell you, that was not the archiver. It was broken before I archived it. But there are some downsides.
I've been through enough of these that broken images don't scare me as much with an archive anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm not obsessed enough anymore to go back and fix everything.
Yeah, for sure.
Once I was.
So the search isn't going to work because this called the database, right? So if I search in here and go like this, it's going to say, sure. But you can, so there's some downsides, but that's where this little tool up here is really cool, because I can look in here and I don't know what.
Go Hitchcock. Hitchcock.
And so it's on all of these pages in this archive, right? This is per site. Exactly. So we can look at, this was talked about on this post from 2014, and apparently one of the search, maybe not, is in a featured category, you know. So you get some capability to search, which is, I think, good. And that's one thing that HTTrack won't be able to do for you. So that's one downside to that. But, you know, for smaller projects, using HTTrack is actually nice, because you don't have to do quite the level of redirection that I did to make all of the links still work.
Yeah.
But, you know, now that I've figured it out, we can reuse that till, you know.
I think I might use HTTrack for DS106 and see how that works before going Web Recorder. Yeah. But I'm now know like when to use what and why. So that's
well, awesome. And the cool thing is with my site archiving toolkit as it exists is you can just let it loose and see how it goes and
which
decide
one works
after the fact.
You know? Now I understand better.
Yeah, and for 1,000 sites, that's a big one, right? Like that will take a long time probably. Sorry, 1,000 posts. But.
Yeah, it will take a while. But let me say, we got 1 minute left before we have to jump. Mm-hmm. What's your last word on the archiving toolkit?
Well, the thing is, I'm constantly improving it. We do have a few people using constantly. I'm improving it bit by bit. You know, I have upcoming features I'd like to add. Like I would like to give you a flag or maybe a config file where you can tell it I only want to make one type or the other, things like that. But you know, this is really just to try to make these tools that already exist easier to use. And I do have some folks who are using it and giving me feedback on like, oh, this didn't work. And sometimes I'm like, sorry, talk to Web Recorder. Actually, I haven't really had to say that too much. These tools do typically do a pretty good job. But you know, if you have something you want to archive, check it out. Use the toolkit. I want to hear about what does and doesn't work. I can't promise I can fix everything, but like, I really want to make this something that doesn't feel like a daunting task. Now, I don't mean 9,000 sites is an extreme case, but if you want to archive 1 or 2 sites, this shouldn't be that hard, and that's what my toolkit's trying to do.
Yeah.
So
You won't need 10 different server cloudlet
No.
driven instances to do this.
first, spin up your own cloud infrastructure. That's step
Exactly.
one.
Yeah, exactly. Can I have a last word?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. My last word is I find it really entertaining and joyful when you're like, you know, and I'm constantly, and then you're the first one to challenge yourself. I'm not constantly. What am I talking about?
I don't want to
Bit by
oversell my
bit.
commitment here. It's
But
just like,
you don't
this
even-
is something we do, you know. I don't want
the on the fly self editing. You're like, no, not that word. Cross off this word. It's awesome.
I don't want to oversell and let people think that like that this is something I'm spending 20 hours a week doing. It's like once in a while I'll spend an hour or two playing with it.
It's a brilliant tool. You archive looking for Whitman, which was a project using a bit of a smaller WordPress.
And that was a HT track one in that case.
And that worked out great. It was a great archive of a great project. And then UMW blogs, and there's many, I'm sure, to come. So it's an awesome tool, and I hope you constantly update it because we need it.
You'll have to talk to my boss about the time allocation.
Yeah. Let me see if I can get him on the phone. I heard he's a real jackass.
Cool. Well, hopefully this was I don't know, useful or interesting to somebody. And
I'm going to try it this weekend on DS106, and I'll also try it on ELS blog. So I'd love it.
Let me know and how that goes. And you know, like I said, I think we should have a larger conversation about the project of retiring UMW blogs and what that meant. And this is one small part of it, but I wanted to get all this technical stuff out of the way because I think this is cool and I'm excited about it, but there's a lot more to talk about. And I really hope that some folks who are in charge of web services that maybe have to be spun down consider something like this, and you know, you can talk to us about it. Maybe we can help you think it
and
through.
The cost is not so crazy. I think that was also a good thing that came through. Like, you can do this and keep it alive for a pittance. And you know, there is some work in archiving it, but there's some work in spinning anything down. But saving it for long term, I agree with you. It's a responsible move if you're building this kind of web content as part of a higher ed organization. I mean, people will miss it, I believe, and I firmly believe that, and I think it's worth the investment to preserve it. Thank you very much for coming to my TED Talk. I said that for you, Brian Lamb, jerk. Okay.
See you all.